So preact is awesome, it's smaller and it has pretty much the same API. So should we always reuse it is the question. And the answer as always is it depends. Let's find out what the differences are. And let's simply find this out on preactjs.com. If you click on guide, you can also click on differences to React there. Now feel free to read through that article to learn more about the differences. In the end, you have a nice list here. You see what's included, so what is exactly the same as React. And these are things like higher order components, creating components, your functional components, and all that stuff. You'll also see that, for example, React create element becomes age, a function called age. That is one of the small differences I mentioned. It's pretty much the same API, but not entirely. But this page lists all the differences. So what was added? As I said, it even offers some new features. And for example, you get this props and this state passed as an argument to the render function. So that inside there, you can simply call props and state without the this keyword. But you can also still use the this keyword, as it also mentions here. Now, that's a nice addition, and that's generally the theme of the added things. Nice additions. For example, you can use the class keyword and don't have to use class name as in React. These are all the tiny things preact added. But of course there are also things missing. For example, prop type validation. Though prop types also were pulled into a separate library with the latest version of React, to be honest. So the what's missing part isn't that relevant here. The most things that are missing are things behind the scenes. Here, these are really mostly cosmetic things, though they also strip out quite a lot of source code. That certainly is something to consider. And we can imagine that prop types were put into a separate library by the React team to shrink the size of the React library and get closer to preact. Now, that's the differences on a screen here on a page. And this article should be helpful for you if you try to switch from the React API to the preact one. As I mentioned, it's pretty much the same. It's tiny things like the age function instead of React create element. But you probably never called React create element manually anyways. And JSX, of course, is supported. Now, the biggest difference behind the scenes probably is how DOM diffing works. So how preact finds out whether it needs to update something and how React does that. And we need a benchmark to find out what's better if we want to measure it in better and worse as categories. To answer this question about what's better, you can search for JavaScript Framework Benchmark and you should find this GitHub repository. There, a couple of different JavaScript frameworks are benchmarked against each other. You can also download this and run it on your machine, though I will warn you that this takes quite a lot of time. But conveniently, you can find the latest result of these benchmarks in the GitHub repo if you click on this image here. Then you get this table, which is quite big, where you can see a lot of the different JavaScript frameworks benchmarked against each other. You should always be careful when analyzing such numbers, because the tests here might not be important for the kind of app you're building. In the end, what is tested here are a couple of operations, like for example creating and removing 10,000 rows of data. And there we can find React 16, so the latest version of React, which I used for recording this course, and we also find preact here. Now, if we compare them, we see they're very close in performance terms, but what we can also see, for example, that for startup time, which is the second lowest row here, React version 16 has 53 milliseconds and preact has 36, which is quite a bit faster. The reason for this, of course, is the smaller size. We can also see that despite the smaller size, for operations like clearing a lot of rows, the third row from the bottom, React is faster than preact because file size of the library doesn't matter for that. What matters is how performant the diffing algorithm and the updating algorithm is. And of course, preact has to strip out some things. React, on the other hand, seems to be a bit more efficient when we look at this benchmark. So that is how you can look at it. Preact saves you a lot of time when you load your app, when you start it for the first time. It's much smaller, it doesn't take up as much space, And if you have an application where the initial download time matters a lot and where you want to send as little code as possible across the wire, preact might be an awesome alternative to React. If you're building a super big, performance heavy enterprise application, React, especially in version 16, might still be the better choice. But whatever you choose, feel free to play around with preact, read through the guide here to find out how to use it, use the preact CLI to create new projects with it easily, and be aware that there is this great alternative to React, which is basically the same but much smaller when we look at the library size.